week's episode, we discuss the most important issues facing our film industry in 2020, gender equality and representation. We share some of the real stories focusing on our different experiences working on films here in Canberra, and we share our 5 best tips on how we can all be safe and welcoming on film sets. I began this podcast as a form of therapy and self-education. I wanted to share, learn and talk about the things that I felt were important to me, my friends, colleagues and professionals in the film industry. The vision has been to create a narrative of our collective story through my eyes and through those I value greatly. Which brings us to this week's episode, where I have in the studio with me April Watson of What's On Media and producer of Alice. I have Claire Strickland, who was the costume designer on Me and My Mates vs. Zombie Apocalypse. And we have Rachel O'Neill, who was a producer on our award-winning short film, The Blue Man. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I've got a question for you. What do you think is wrong with the film industry at the moment with respect to gender equality?
It's a tough question because I would argue as a man that we are doing the best we can. And I can understand completely that that is never a good enough answer. I feel like that at least in what I've tried to do as a filmmaker, that I will look to listen to all voices. And that's beyond just gender, but also ethnicity and background and experience and all those different things. And so when I feel like I'm doing the best I can, it kind of feels like, how do I get other people to sort of see it the way that I'm trying to learn and understand the way that I feel it should be as part of, being a producer in the industry.
So have you seen things that you've been uncomfortable with?
Often, and probably only more identified in recent times. Perhaps as a younger filmmaker, perhaps due to the amount of experience that I may have had at the time, I did not see it clearly. But where I believe I've put effort to understand more, I've been able to identify it a lot easier, which has meant that I can then do something about it a lot sooner, rather than let it sit, let it become a established cultural behavior that might exist.
I agree. I think in the pre-work that we did for our first on-set shoot recently for Alice, you kind of let me take the reins on that, knowing that I would have a bit more insight about the fact that on sets we need to make some rules, and that might seem like a pretty elementary thing to do and to tell people how to behave, but sometimes it's really good, I find, to outline things in black and white and just say, don't do these things, or do make sure you do these things. Not just about inclusion, but about being mindful of the fact that the way that you behave in the past doesn't necessarily mean it was okay. And so we're letting kind of everyone know that there's a level, a standard of what's okay.
With the movement in film at the moment, with the Weinstein factor has been a major high-level media thing, but the movement itself of better gender equality in film, do you believe it's been successful so far? Or what are the things we need to look towards to make it successful if it's not?
I think it's certainly highlighted, and it's not just in film either. It's in lots of different disciplines in life at the moment that gender equality is being highlighted. So whether it's actually improving, I'm unsure, but it's definitely highlighted. I know in my experience working in film, at the time I was never bothered by anything, but in hindsight there is things that I would absolutely question now. But at the time you don't really think twice about it, which is, I guess, problematic. And now I would be much more conscious of what is going on around me and what is said to me, I suppose, as a female.
Absolutely. And I think if we look at, say, someone like Reese Witherspoon and the podcast that she did, Second Life, the conversation about there aren't enough parts for women are not getting accolades for things. I think the recent event ceremony is probably a reasonable indication. And look, when we talk about equality, like, gender is the first factor. It's the main thing, because we know that women are not being given the same chances as men. They're not being given the same money as men. They don't have the same voice as men. They're more likely to be assaulted and victimized and the victims of violence, and the list goes on. But also that there are not as many roles for people of colour. So then you drill that down a little bit harder, and it's women of colour. So they're in 2 minorities, that those opportunities are even less still. And it's not just in the film industry, but I think that if a woman with that much white privilege is still struggling, we're not in a good place still, but we're talking about it. And that's a big step from 10 years ago.
Now, being that we are Canberra filmmakers, I mean, I've been working for more than 12 years in Canberra's industry. I started out as a young 18-year-old, and I'm now 35. And
That's terrible maths.
what was the math I provided?
18 to
That
35.
makes you 30 years old.
So maybe 17 years.
Oh, yeah.
Leave it to the ladies, doll.
I was going for my professional career rather than when I was a student.
Okay.
No, because when you learn, you're always learning. When are you not a student?
Okay, I'll start again.
Leave it in. Fun to tease you, Dan. I love you.
So yes, so in my 17 years, I have started out as a young man, and I have gone through a growth of what has been my contribution and my involvement into the local industry. I think a lot of inspiration for the podcast in itself, starting it, has come from my own mental health journey, but also from the way that I was feeling frustrated with the way that some of Canberra's other practitioners approach the things. And I guess I wanted to get my voice out there clearly, and that's kind of why this podcast is there, so that there is no confusion on my message and what I'm trying to achieve and what my aspirations are as a filmmaker. But also the fact that at some time, it would have been 18 months ago, I heard pretty sad things that were happening on our film sets. Now, be it not professional or amateur or student film sets, they were things that really bothered me, really I struggled with. And so in a way, I reached out to you to discuss and to understand and to comprehend. Do you think filmmakers in Canberra are doing enough to address gender equality?
I think it's dependent on the filmmaker.
I don't know if we can generalise on a location. And I suppose in Canberra, we have that level of exposure as far as, we're the nation's capital. And
We're quite left wing.
Yeah. And I think that if I look at the film sets that I've been on, it's only a couple of times that I've been on set somewhere, and most of the time you're there, Dan. So it's hard for me to say. I think that when I hear about the things that I have heard, and as you've said, we've both been exposed to different stories about things that happen on set that make us go, "Ooh, that's not quite right, is it?" Yeah. That nobody's doing enough. So the answer, I guess, is no. Yeah. But I don't know if we need to point the finger at filmmakers in Canberra, or even filmmakers, as you rightly said before, Claire. It's so much bigger than the film industry, but obviously in the context of this podcast, are the people that we work with or know or have knowledge of in our industry doing enough? No, they're not.
And planting this question in our episode structure there was intention behind that, and that it was to bring up one particular topic that I've struggled as a producer when I'm trying to bring together a crew, and that is there are not enough females to invite. I absolutely feel like absolute frustration when I'm looking through on Facebook groups or new students or anything like that and going, I would like to find female filmmakers who are looking for experiences to work on our productions. And it's so difficult. I know for a fact that in the last couple of years, my film sets have not been as equal as they should have been, but it's because of the fact that there isn't enough females who are identifying as filmmakers, or as people interested to be involved in our industry.
And this is not a criticism of you or of our film, but we've got one female producer, one female intern, 3 female actresses, and a female makeup artist.
Yeah.
Okay, so the lady that makes the tea
and
a costume designer,
yes.
Right? So the lady that makes the tea, the lady that does the admin work, the lady that does the makeup, 3 stage girls, and someone handling the dresses. Yeah. No ladies holding cameras, no ladies holding lights, no people who identify as female doing any of the hard quote marks. The hard work or the work that will win them an award.
And on that as well, then we've got, so for our Wombat Man series, our DOP is Liz, and she's been doing amazing work as a DOP, and it's her first sort of bigger project that she's been working on. And part of where I was attracted to the idea to involve her as DOP and not as just a camera assistant was she was a young student who deserved an opportunity. Yeah. And we've been working on the project for some time, and so over that period, she has grown into that role.
I'm thinking back to me and my mates, and thinking about everybody who was working on that set. And it is very similar to what April just listed. However, we had a female script supervisor, we had a female boom operator, we had a female production manager, but our DOP was male, our first AD was male, our director was male, our head of sound was male. Yeah, all of the camera operators were male.
Yeah.
Our runners, we had a lot of female runners. We had a female costume designer, obviously. We had a female makeup artist as well. So, and I mean, you know, there's a culture that is still occurring, you know. Yes, actually, there are a lot of males in the makeup industry, and there have been since the 80s, really, in the high-end stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still a female-dominated industry, just like hair is too.
Absolutely.
So is costume design. You know, it's very female-dominated, and but you know, I'm hoping there is starting to be a culture shift in sound design and in and camera operations, and you know, and as you know, Dan was just saying, you've got a DOP in his movie. Or series, web series, Wombat Man, who is female, which, you know, that's starting to make a difference.
At the same time, then the rest of the crew are all male. So
Yeah.
And so as I said, it's just been, as a producer, it's frustrating. Like what you've just described, you know, some of the biggest projects that I'm involved with, you've just described, you know, a nightmare in my head in regards to gender equality. It doesn't exist.
It's
not
absolutely reflected in not just the film making world. Just look at government. You know, look at who's in the top spots. It's male. It's just like the film industry. You know, it's male dominated still. There's a lot of female middle management, which is exactly the same as the filmmaking industry. Lots of female middle management, but you know, the head honchos are still men.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Why do you think it is though? Do you think that they're there and have lost confidence? Do you think that there's just no females getting into filmmaking?
I think the opportunities are lacking because the culture hasn't shifted yet enough.
Yeah. And I think that, Dan, your acknowledgement of the fact that you actively look to give Liz an opportunity is when you talk about, you know, that's a nightmare because how am I ever to overcome gender inequality? You can do it one female appointment on your set at a time. We're not asking anyone to solve the problem instantly by having an all-female set because you want the right person for the job. The difference is that people like Kathleen Kennedy and Amy Pascal were overlooked because they were women, not because they weren't as good as their male counterparts. So if you look at Liz and some other unnamed person of any gender and you go, she's the best person for the job, great. The fact that she's able to show up and get a run in 2020 or 2019, because that project's been going now for a little while, the fact that she can even show up and be considered is a step forward. But now then she needs to turn up and two other women turn up and one other guy and someone who's non-binary and someone who's disabled. And, you know, it needs to be a non-exhaustive list of people who can show up and get a go if they're the best. And that's the issue with inequality, is that you're immediately overlooked if you present as female.
Dan, you have taught at universities and CIT around Canberra. What's the ratio of gender in those classrooms?
it's men mostly, young men. Their hardest workers, though, are the young females. They seem much more focused. They seem more interested in achieving. But where they seem to go, and particularly because it's Canberra, is they don't end up in the film industry. They end up in public service, and they end up in common communication roles. And
graphic design.
And
You can't see, but I've got my hand up.
yeah. So that's why, because they work so hard, that's why they achieve in that. Yeah. So if you look at where the pathways are, there are those middle management roles where they are succeeding completely.
But we have to work twice as hard to get half as much notice.
The thing from my experience from going to CIT, I felt personally that I got pushed continuously into the producer role, into the organisation role, not by all the teachers, by one in particular. And then the same people were pushed into the directing roles. And you'll find that was mostly males being pushed into the directing roles and the sound roles, unless you really put your hand up.
Those themes of gender inequality were kind of being perpetuated.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just happening all the way through.
Being completely honest, I'm not the most confident person at the best of times, but then to constantly have the same people being put into those directing roles, you see them get stronger. And then as a diploma student, I still felt like I was in the Cert 3 skill level for a director or for a soundie. So I did just stick with what I was comfortable. And it's continued since CIT. I've stuck to those similar sort of roles.
And I think when you lack confidence and someone reiterates to you that you're not as good as other people,
Or you're really good at organising.
yeah, well done.
I
Also,
sunk
here,
further
take this
back
tea
into that
towel.
hole.
Yeah, I think when someone reiterates that to you, perhaps if someone had continuously offered you opportunities to do something outside of those basically coordination roles in one way or another, you might have built up the confidence to be like, no, I am quite good. And even as someone who is naturally not confident.
That's where I found my opportunities, I guess, outside of CIT. Say, for instance, Dan was my teacher at CIT. Dan was very supportive of one of my first films. Like, I did a first edit and got told by the editing teacher that it was rubbish. And then that teacher was sick, and Dan came in as a relief teacher and sat down and watched my film and actually provided me with constructive criticism. And so I set out to refilm completely with what I'd learnt from Dan in one session versus what I'd learnt in a whole term. I completely refilmed, reshot, re-edited in like a week and a half and managed to win awards for my film.
And I think that that's about him taking the time to look at your film. He didn't look at you and go, oh, well, she's a girl, so don't worry about it. And maybe that other teacher, I'd like to imagine that that teacher wasn't looking at you and going, oh, you're a girl, so your film's stupid. But there's a real possibility that they did, even though the original cut of your film could have been quite brilliant. I mean, obviously, Dan gave you constructive criticism, but again, I might have showed up and watched it and thought it was quite good, because what do I know?
Keeping in mind this was like, 18 weeks into a course that I've never touched a camera before, never held a microphone before, and I had to do all of those roles myself.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
That's big. And yeah, for you to say that you then went on to win an award or awards for your film because somebody took the time to give you an opportunity speaks volumes.
Yeah, it made a big difference.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have continued on to do my certificate 4 if it hadn't have been for Dan.
I have a question now. I know, Dan, you run filmmaking workshops for young people, and my children have attended. My 2 male children have attended, not my female. Not because I haven't given her the opportunity, just because she hasn't taken it up. But I believe when I saw the kids attending, it is mostly boys.
I would argue that that is what it was
Oh, good.
once upon a time.
Yes.
When your son attended first.
Yeah. So when Zach was, he was probably 11 or 12.
Yep, that's right. It was boys. And then something shifted. I think it was because I made it clear that girls were welcome. I think I put in the ad, I said girls.
And it was a unisex opportunity.
Yeah, it was
or
girls
something.
too or something. And since then, it has been predominantly girls.
That's great.
And in all honesty, and I mean, I think the young men, what they bring to the workshops is great, but the experiences that I have with the young female filmmakers, they're 12, 13, they're just at the right age of where they're telling, their imagination has just exploded, that they've come to understand what it means to tell stories. And what they are doing in the workshop is it's the reason why I keep doing it. If the boys just kept coming, I think I would be tired. I think I would have had enough, because
As a mother of a boy, I'm like,
I agree.
they've got some great ideas, but they all want to punch each other, shoot each other, and explode things, which is nothing wrong with that. I want to make movies like
And
that.
I'm sure there's lots of girls who want to do, there's punching and exploding, but they want to do it in a Harley Quinn kind of a way, not a Tarantino kind of way.
I mean, a great example being that we just ran this summer workshop, and it was on the backdrop of fires, because we had all the smoke and we almost had to cancel it because of the smoke, but gladly went ahead. And so I put to the filmmakers, I said, we really want to focus on something that has environmental theme to it. Now, I have no concern about what stories you wanted to tell. Like, you just tell your story within that scope. We'll brainstorm out from there. And then each of the stories that came out had this really strong understanding of what clearly, going into politics a little bit here, that all our political parties have struggled to comprehend. And that is we're not doing enough, and that inaction is just pointless, and action is where the way we got to go. I was almost astounded by the way that they responded to the theme, and the way that they approached it. And I think the films that came out of that last workshop, there were 4 films in total. They're some of my favorite films that we've produced in the 4 and a bit years that we've been working together making workshops.
I think that's great, and I think being able to be current is important because kids are so exposed to things now. And you use the word wokeness before, and it can kind of be used to slag people off a little bit sometimes when, people are too left wing, they're too woke, they're too this, because they're, going against the grain of patriarchy and white privilege. And I think the fact that you could have both male and female filmmakers turn up somewhere and all have the same quality of having a go is a comment on the fact that if everybody was allowed to have a turn, the best ones would win, not necessarily because they were a boy or a girl or something else.
Yeah.
On a kind of side note, I mean, I hope that having equal numbers between female and male kids in your workshops helps normalize it for the boys as well. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've showed up on set as a production manager or a unit manager or producer and been asked, "Oh, are you the makeup artist?"
Or can you get me a coffee?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so true. Anywhere in a workplace, I'm sure if you showed up in a mechanics workshop, they'd be like, "What are you doing here?" There is a bias across different industries, and even in, especially in film, for people to see a woman there and assume something about what role she's there to play.
And it starts at such a young age, as we've just been talking about. Like, so having having these workshops that Dan's running with more females than males, do you think that is the start of the shift as well?
Well, the reason for putting these workshops on was to address part of my frustration with trying to have equality on film sets. I feel like that if we don't start embedding the ideas that doing camera work is a girl thing as well as a boy thing from an early age, then we won't get anywhere. Like, giving a girl a camera at the age of 11 and 12 should be empowering, and they should want to use cameras for the rest of their life if they want to be a filmmaker. And I feel that, so you look at the students that I've taught at CIT and UC, to hear I don't know how to touch a camera, I don't want to touch it because I'm worried I'm gonna break it. Like, I always say, no, well, just try it. But that shouldn't be a thing by the time you're at uni. If you're going to be a filmmaker, or you're going to be a storyteller or content creator, a media person, having comfortability around film equipment is the way to go. And so the workshops are designed for that perfect opportunity, that purpose of giving them a chance to just be comfortable with what is considered to be a boy's toy.
Yeah. And I think if we look at Taylor Harris, the female AFL player who was just mercilessly roasted by the internet, men on the internet, that's another place in sport where it has to be the women's league of something. It's not just a league where women show up and they can have a crack. We have to give them their own whole subset of something. WNBA, or that thing where women play netball and men play basketball because somehow there's a different level of talent associated with dribbling as there is to passing. Makes zero sense. But I think the fact that you're engaging them at an equal level, not we've got a ladies' workshop and a boys' workshop. The boys' workshop has, the bombs and the guns and the whatever, and your set is going to be pink. I think that's a real difference and a significant one. And I think if the parents are seeing those targeted ads that say, would you like to send your child along to this cool school holiday activity where they can learn stuff and engage with their passion, and none of it's about whether they're a boy or a girl, just whether or not they want to make a film, that again is just saying anyone can come and do it. Have a crack.
And on the sport thing, I will say the one place that has achieved great steps.
He's going to say soccer, isn't he?
I am going to say soccer.
But he's right.
Oh, I know, but he's a soccer fan. So
yeah, well, the FFA to basically instill without question the national team, men and women, get paid the exact same. And it wasn't lower the men's, it was bring the women up to the men's level, is proven to be successful. I mean, look at the success of the Matildas in the last few weeks, just alone. Sport
is getting better. And even commentary of sport, on sport, if you do
unfortunately the fans are not getting better.
If you do watch sport now, I mean, it's not what we would call equality. However, people like Erin Molan, are getting in there and commentating and having commentary on something that was always deemed to be male. So, there are improvements. By far, it's not equal yet, but it is getting there. I mean, it's a positive step, I suppose. But I mean, I don't like to say it like that, but it's, because it's a bit depressing. But at least it is a positive step in the right direction.
At least they're doing better than the film industry, I think. They're way ahead.
They have consciously seen, and you know, cricket as well. Women's cricket is becoming very popular now, and so I think it is. I think they are doing better than the film industry is.
Yeah, and then if we look at Ash Barty, and then conversely, the New Zealand Parliament, where the men were lauded for being able to handle a newborn in the chambers, but Ash Barty was criticised for holding a baby as a shield. And it was a tactical move to stop her being criticised because look at, oh, so cute, there's a baby. But when men do it, it's extremely cute and, oh, let's praise them. So I think that, you know, wherever we see that divide, for us to address it, bring the topic forward is a better step than to just ignore it, because continuing to ignore it is how we've ended up having to ask questions like, is it safe to be on set, whether it be in Canberra, in Australia, or just generally in the industry? Is it safe for us to go on set as women maybe till 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe where, you're there alone with a couple of people for a small shoot? Is it safe? Do you feel okay about it? Are you at risk? All those questions.
What would you say are the top 5 tips on how we can be safe and welcoming on film sets?
I think one of the things that we can do to be safer and more welcoming, as I mentioned earlier, articulating to people what is okay and what is not okay. If you start with a benchmark and you say everything below the line, not okay, don't do it. If I see you doing it, you're booted, is a good start, because what that says is, hi ladies, we recognise that you have experienced this myriad of problems, whether it be physical assault, being made to feel uncomfortable, harassment, whatever. If we recognise and we call that out from the get-go and we say, this will not be tolerated, and allow people to feel validated in their genuine fear, which is a real thing, to being afraid to go somewhere where you might be the only person who's female on set, I think that's a good start.
I think that's really, really good. My reservations on that is the reporting side, which probably leads me to my tip or recommendation, is that we have people on set who are mental health first aid trained. So there is always has to be a first aider because that's legislated.
She's got an English accent. She can't say
legislated. However, mental health first aid is becoming more and more important. And I think, you know, having somebody who is trained in mental health first aid is going to be a positive step. And also as somebody that can be, that people can talk to if they have a problem, because telling somebody or a crew that these behaviors are not acceptable, who do you report it to? Do you report it to the producer, who's the sleazy one trying to get into your undies? Or do you report it to the runner who actually can't do anything? Like you need somebody to be able to report to that is actually going to take responsibility.
So I will say off the back of that, we laid out those rules and regulations for the Alice set, and I listed myself as the harassment contact officer.
Yeah.
That was a terminology that I took from
work. I think that's a great one.
And I was like, hey, says what it is. Contact me if you are being harassed. Hello. I put myself in that vulnerable position of having to be reported to. It can be hard. And I think it's hard also sometimes for us to hear that someone we like is behaving really inappropriately. And I think that's where someone like Alec Baldwin, who falls into that thing of defending someone who's known to be a sexual predator, or literally anyone who said Harvey Weinstein's a good guy, or Prince Andrew, Jeffrey Epstein, you know, the list goes on. Anyone that
allegedly,
anyone that aligns themselves with someone that they later find out behaves in a way that they find abhorrent, that's a tough time. If someone on our set had come and told me that somebody else was behaving in a way they didn't like, that doesn't make me feel good, because I like and admire all the people on our set. But at the end of the day, if I have signed up to the job of making sure that people stay safe and identified to them, hello, if you're looking to report something that you're not okay with, I'm your gal. But also, I think I made the judgment call to appoint myself because I made an assumption that as a woman, people would feel more comfortable talking to me. So is that biased? Or is that just accurate?
Well, as I was thinking about what I was going to say, I was thinking, would you have a female and a male harassment officer, or would it just be somebody who is trained? And also, we also need to think about the consequences. So if you are if that somebody is reported, what do you do with that information, and what do you do to assist them to see what they are doing wrong?
Because obviously, in context of no doing this and no doing that, no running, no jumping, no diving, it's pretty easy. You ran, you jumped, you dove, but no making people feel uncomfortable, no sex on the set, no whatever it might be. If they look at their actions and don't see themselves as bullying, harassing, behaving inappropriately, making sexist jokes, look, if it's really funny, guys, it's probably harassment. That's a good rule. If everyone's laughing except one person, it's not okay. And yeah, I do think that if we can take gender bias out of it and say whoever's trained is the person that you go to, but then how do you choose who you're going to train? The person who has a proclivity for listening, who's most likely to be forceful enough to say, you behaved badly, you must now be punished. But also you're putting the production at risk. When you behave badly and someone calls you out on it, if you're the lead actor, you're in the whole production's in serious trouble. And that's where we find ourselves in that really tight spot where the person who's the contact officer says to the producer, the director, this person's done X, and you go, yeah, but we've shot all bar 4 scenes. We can't lose them now just because they've touched someone inappropriately. You do have to. So it's really tough. It's not easy.
And it's how to, and I do believe, like, I think that, booting them, for example, which is, the knee-jerk reaction, you kick them out, is probably not the ideal solution. Some form of counselling to let them understand what has actually occurred. Yes, if they are, I suppose at the extreme end, if they assaulted somebody and they are perfectly aware that they did, that is a matter for the police.
Yeah, but then you look at Marlon Brando and like some of the things that happen on sets in that era were assault, but no one was going to own up to that. No, nobody was going to say that was okay. The way that people were treated on sets, especially women, would nowadays be considered a crime, but it wasn't back in the day. And so that precedent's been set. It's that, that Mad Men for advertising, the glorification of what it's like to be somewhere and that kind of fuck you way to the top, the couch, all of those tropes come from somewhere. And I think that, if people are committing crimes out on your set, then you got to do something about it, but it's the context. And if the victim's afraid of that person or is afraid of losing the one gig that they got because they're a lady and it's really hard to get a job, you're really in a tight spot.
Yeah, I mean, I have been put in a position where I was uncomfortable and I didn't really do anything about it, and I kind of shrugged it off. If I was a different person, maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know, but that's neither here nor there really, because I'm okay from my experiences and I haven't been scarred or anything from it, but maybe somebody else has. And I know, after talking to Dan and having a discussion about this podcast, there are people who've worked in sets in Canberra who have had experiences that have left them scarred.
Yeah.
And don't want to work in the industry anymore.
Yeah.
Have left town. Like, that's how serious.
So this sort of behaviour, I mean, we need to stop it before it starts. I think that's probably the main rule that you laid out right at the beginning there was, this is the behaviour that is not acceptable. And these are the consequences of this unacceptable behaviour if you do them.
And being dismissed is a reality, or it needs to be seen as a reality. And I think there will be a level of people having to be made examples of. And they're going to feel like they're scapegoats because they're not going to believe that, I'm not as bad as some other person. But it's not about, you can't rate somebody else's experience. If you say that, what I did was only like a 4 out of 10, but the other person has gone away, left town, quit the industry, that person doesn't want to work in that industry anymore because of something that you did. You're a 10 out of 10. You might even be an 11 out of 10.
Do you think it's realistic, though, to have somebody on every set who can be a harassment manager?
I think that can't be their only job. So it could be anybody. And as April said, for her, she's the producer, but she also was that person.
You just think about how many student films where they're
absolutely
3-4 people.
Then it's one of them, or it's.
I think there's a second side to it, which would go with every industry, is also educating and empowering people to not stand for the behaviour. If you're the lead actress and it's not acceptable, don't be afraid to just leave. it's their fault, not your fault if the production doesn't go through.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not your responsibility. It's their responsibility for their own behaviour.
Yeah, and empowering people to be able to speak up. I mean, that's what we need to do
In general.
in life.
And I think Dan is someone who's being demonstrative about his intolerance for inequality and gendered bias on his sets, is opening the doors for the other men on the set to say, yeah, that's not cool. Dan and I both agree that that's not cool. Dan can't be the only person on the set that behaves that way. That won't work either. So I think being able to have those frank conversations with the writer, with the other producer, with the boom operator, with whoever it might be, and just be like, yeah, I observed this thing. It wasn't good. I didn't like it. And for that person to go, yeah, same. We've got to just keep those conversations going whenever you see something, say something.
And even what Rachel was saying, universities and TAFEs should be actually, including this in their curriculums.
Yeah.
Is there anything included around behaviour in the qualifications that you've done, Rach?
I don't recall. I do know some people who did music videos and they might have had a sensitive scene and so they've done a closed shoot, but I don't recall it being taught to us. It might have just been their own common sense.
Yeah. And that's the thing, adding it to the curriculum or running seminars on, behaviour on sets, or I don't know, something a bit more sexy than that. Like maybe sexy is the wrong term.
Yeah, not too sexy. I think that, if we look at human, whatever it is, human sexuality or whatever, the primary school kind of where they enter into that sex ed space, the first conversation is probably needing to be about consent and bodily autonomy. Because if we have 8-year-olds who understand bodily autonomy, then we will have 18-year-olds and 28-year-olds and so on who understand that it's not okay to do what's not okay, and have some way of having a concept of that. But also being mindful of the fact that socially some people see their behaviour in one way, whether it be through the lens of being on the spectrum or a cultural thing, in my country I do it this way, or, what they've been exposed to. So that's where rules come in, because it makes it a clear line about what's okay, no matter your background.
I think the one thing that I will add to this final wrap up that we've been going through is that I am not afraid to admit I have not done enough, and I am not embarrassed to say that I can be better. And that is something that I'm going to continue to be, as to the best of my ability for all my projects going forward. I know that 2020 for me is going to be one of the busiest years of my life, possibly with Alice, with Wombat Man continuing, with numerous other projects that are happening here at Sanguinetti Media, and I know that all that's going to be on the back of my mind is obviously doing the best for the people involved and making sure that everyone feels welcome and safe and excited to work with us. Yeah.
I think one of the key things about inclusion, and it doesn't just have to be about gender, but obviously that being the topic, if you're not sure, ask them. If you're wondering what a woman on your set wants from you as the director, producer, whatever, ask them. Because more than likely, if you give someone the opportunity to share their needs with you, they're going to tell you. If they feel like they can't express what they need, I need more privacy. I need this to be a closed shoot. I need you to listen to my complaint about this person. Whatever it might be, if you ask somebody what they need from you, hopefully they will feel comfortable to tell you.
Thank you so much to April, Claire and Rachel for their time to join me this week. They will be back for a future episode as we continue the conversation on bridging the gender gap in the film industry. April runs a body positivity blog, which is a dedicated space of self-love and body positivity. You can follow her at The Bodzilla on Instagram. You can also support this podcast by becoming a patron for just $1 a month. Your support contributes to the general running costs of a regular podcast, and your subscription will give you early access to every episode. You can join us at www.patreon.com/Sanguinetti Media.
Film Rhapsody is produced by Russell Lee and Dan Sanguinetti for Sanguinetti Media. Find our home at sanguinettimedia.com.au.